Now, the last speaker, only because she may have been held up at Parliament today, is Joan McAlpine, our local MSP. Now, Joan was born in Gourock, attended St Ninian's Primary School and Gourock St Columbus Secondary Schools in Greenock. She has an MA Honours in Scottish History and Economic History from Glasgow University. Joan also has a postgraduate diploma in newspaper journalism from City University in London. She began her career with the Greenock Telegraph in 1987 and then went to work for the Scotsman and the Sunday Times, where she won the Scottish Journalist of the Year award in 1999. In 2000, she was appointed editor of the Sunday Times Scotland, and the following year became the deputy editor of the Herald, the first woman to hold the post with the Herald. She has been an MSP since 2011. Joan, thank you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and I just wanted to say that I think all our speakers tonight, the fact that I'm in the minority as a politician just shows the strength of this campaign, because you know our speakers have all been absolutely fantastic, and what a wide variety of walks of life that they come from, and I think that really shows the strength of the Yes campaign. I wanted to start by talking about the Dambusters. I don't know if any of you recognise the reference to the Dambusters, but it was used recently by the No campaign when they were briefing the Herald newspaper about their tactics since George Osborne made his speech about currency. Previously they had called their campaign Project Fear, but they obviously decided they needed to ratchet it up, so they've changed it to the Dambusters. And this is this constant negativity. You know, every day there's another strike at the Yes campaign, and they think that that's going to wear us down. But the thing about it is that that's been going for 2 or 3 weeks now, and I can reveal exclusively tonight that there's a poll tomorrow in the Record newspaper that shows that the Yes vote is now up to 45%. So the Dambusters... the Dambusters hasn't worked. The other thing about the Dambusters, I remember from when I was a wee girl watching it on telly on a Saturday afternoon, is that it's repeated all the time. It's famous for being repeated. And so with the modern day No Dambusters, because if you look back in the 70s, 80s and 90s, all the scare stories about business leaving Scotland and Scotland being a desert, if we got our own limited Scottish Parliament, all those stories almost word for word came out at that time. We were told devolution would cause all these problems, would lead to death, doom and destruction for Scotland. And it's not been the case. We got our Scottish Parliament, and since we've got our Scottish Parliament, with its limited powers, as already been pointed out, Scotland has done extremely well with those limited powers. It's not as well as we could have done because we're still part of the UK, but things like our employment levels are up, our unemployment levels are down comparatively. We used to be significantly far behind the rest of the UK. We've obviously got great social advances, as Andy was saying, in the areas that we control, like health and education. Education is still free in this country. We've stopped the privatisation of the NHS. We've managed to, because we've got a government with short lines of management, we've managed to attract a lot of investment into the country. And last year there was a survey by Ernst & Young in looking at investment into different parts of the UK, and Scotland's performance was described as sparkling. And that's because, you know, we've got people, you know, running the country who are dead focused on the country. They're not focused on anything else. And it's like Tom Hunter, who hasn't come out for Yes, one of the entrepreneurs of this country. I was at a conference he spoke at a couple of years ago, and he talked about the possibilities of independence, and he said, you know, Scotland could be the speedboat to the UK's supertanker, because it takes a long time to do anything and to turn around the supertanker. But in Scotland, you can get things done very, very quickly. Now, that's an argument for our Parliament having more power than it has at the moment, because at the moment we only control, as Andy said earlier, we control 15% of we will control 15% of the taxes once a new piece of legislation comes into force next year. At the moment, we control 7% of our taxes. And if we control business regulation, if we could give incentives to business and develop an industrial strategy, we could do a great deal better. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about tonight, the vision that we have for Scotland, because the Dambusters and Project Fear have no vision. We have brought out Scotland's Future, which is the Scottish Government's vision for Scotland. Now, it's not going to be everyone's vision, but it's an extremely detailed blueprint for independence. In fact, it's the most detailed blueprint ever produced by any country moving to independence. It's had input from international experts across the most important policy areas on currency, the welfare state and the tax system. Scotland's future puts it beyond any doubt that Scotland has got what it takes to be a successful independent country. And it confirms what the UK Prime Minister, who I never thought I would be quoting, has already said, that Scotland could be another successful independent country, like Norway or Switzerland. We have consistently been one of the top 10 wealthiest countries in the developed world, and we can make that wealth work better for the people of Scotland with independence. Scotland has raised more tax in the UK than the UK for everyone in the last 33 years. And in terms of GDP per capita, Scotland is the 8th wealthiest country in the OECD. Even without North Sea oil, GDP, which is national economic output per head in Scotland, is virtually identical to the UK as a whole, and with oil it's 1/5 bigger. A yes vote in 2014 gives us a range of new opportunities to grow Scotland's economy and create more jobs. And Scotland's future makes clear that it's only with the full powers of independence that we can take advantage of Scotland's natural resources and human talent and secure economic growth. With independence, we'll have the opportunity to make the right choices for the Scottish economy. For example, a new industrial strategy for Scotland. If we could grow our economy by just 1%, just grow output by 1%, that would create another 21,000 jobs. We could promote Scotland more effectively overseas. An increase in exports of 50%, we would see another 100,000 new jobs. Keeping the pound as our currency will ensure continuity for business across Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it's by making the most of our strengths that we can provide the strongest guarantees for years to come. For example, we can choose to save a proportion of our offshore energy wealth in a rainy day fund, so that if a future crisis hits us, we'll be secure, just as Norway has managed to ride out the current financial storms with a £470 billion oil fund. And Norway is not unique in that. I mean, we often quote the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway is the largest one, but all oil-producing countries have sovereign wealth funds that are quite considerable in size. And the only 2 oil-producing countries that do not have a sovereign wealth fund are the UK and Iraq, which I think says it all, really. Scotland's future sets out the gains of Scotland becoming independent, whatever party or government is in power in an independent Scotland, but it also sets out the SNP government's vision for an independent Scotland. I want to start by talking about the gains of independence, whichever party is in government. So whichever party is in government, decisions about Scotland will be taken by the people who care most about Scotland, that is, the people who live and work here. An independent Scottish Parliament will be entirely elected by the people of Scotland. Under the Westminster system, elected representatives from Scotland make up just 9% of the 650 members, and that's even smaller when you consider the unelected House of Lords. Governments will be formed by parties that win elections in Scotland. It will no longer be possible for key decisions to be made by governments that don't command the support of the Scottish electorate. There will be a guarantee that tax and social security rates will be set in line with the wishes of all the people of Scotland, and public services will be kept in public hands. We'll have an economic policy that focuses on economic stability and job security for Scotland. And with independence, decisions about our resources, the level and allocation of public spending will be taken here in Scotland. Our economic policy will be tailored to our strengths, such as our world-class universities and key growth industries like food and drink, life sciences and tourism. And as I said already, we can invest our oil wealth for future generations. Scotland's taxes, whoever is in power, because I think it's pretty obvious that we're going to have a progressive government. We're not going to have a Tory government in Scotland. So the compromises that the Labour Party have had to make in order to win over these Tory voters in the south of England, well, they'll not have to make them, even if they were in government in Scotland. So we won't have nuclear weapons in Scotland. We can get rid of Trident for good. And that means that we can get rid of Trident from the whole of the British Isles, because we've already been told that there isn't any safe place for it to be birthed. So we'll be doing the rest of the people of the country a favour as well. The gains of independence if the SNP is elected a government of an independent Scotland. Our proposal is a transformational extension of childcare, giving our children the best start in life and making it easier for parents, especially mothers, to return to work and deliver new job opportunities. We can abolish the bedroom tax, and that's properly abolish the bedroom tax. At the moment, what we're doing is we're cleaning up the mess that the Westminster government has made. We are coming in and we're saying we're going to fund the shortfall in individual household incomes caused by the bedroom tax. But we have to take that money out of other budgets in Scotland for health and education, because we don't have control of the welfare budget. So basically, if we control the government in Scotland, in an independent Scotland, we won't have the bedroom tax. We're also committed to halt the rollout of universal credit and personal independence payments in Scotland, and allow future Scottish governments to develop reforms to our welfare systems that meet our needs. And when Mark was talking earlier about ATOS in response to one of the questions from the floor, I actually sit on a cross-party group in the Scottish Parliament dealing with people with learning disabilities. And we had someone from the Department of Work and Pensions in talking about personal independence payments. When you move someone onto personal independence payments, there's a 17-page form that they have to fill in. And if they don't meet the deadline, they lose not just their entitlement to the personal independence payment, they lose their entitlement to their existing disability benefits. Now, if somebody has a learning disability and misses the deadline for that form, they don't have any income. And that's just another example. You gave examples earlier of the cruelty of these welfare reforms. They really are absolutely appalling. So one of the things that we're doing is going to create a far more humane welfare system in an independent Scotland. We're also going to look at creating a fairer tax system by ensuring that the basic rate tax allowances and tax credits rise at least in line with inflation. And we're going to end the married couples tax allowance and abolish the Shares for Rights scheme. Protecting pensioners' income with a triple lock so that the pensions increase either by inflation earnings or 2.5%, whichever is highest. That's our minimum guarantee. I mean, going forward, I think we could do a lot better for pensioners. And it's the No campaign talk about pensions a lot, but the state pension in the UK is the lowest in the whole of the EU. I mean, all these other countries that we're told about that are basket cases, like Ireland, still manage to look after their pensioners a lot better than we do. So there's something very, very wrong there. We're going to return the Royal Mail to public ownership in Scotland. The people in Scotland did not want the Royal Mail privatised, and we've made the commitment that we'll return it to public ownership. We'll also set up a Fair Work Commission, and I guarantee that the minimum wage will rise at least in line with inflation. That's a minimum guarantee. These policies are all carefully costed. There will be people out there that think that we should move to a living wage that's considerably higher than the minimum wage. We've been responsible here and we've costed the policies. But going forward, when we control our own economy and make decisions for ourselves, we can look towards building a society based on a real living wage. We'll have a timetable for reducing the rate of corporation tax by up to 3 percentage points. Now, that's something that earlier someone asked a question about attracting business. There was a report out a couple of weeks ago by the Cities, a unit in various universities studying cities in the UK, and the gravitational pull of London in the southeast was sucking wealth from the rest of the country to a ridiculous extent. The second city after London was Edinburgh, but it was way, way behind. And even the UK Business Secretary, Vince Cable, has said that London is like a dark star sucking the wealth and energy out of the rest of the country. And not just Scotland, but other parts of England as well. So we need a comparative advantage. And that's why the SNP policy is a gradual cut in corporation tax by up to 3 percentage points, not getting rid of corporation tax. We also want to collect it more effectively. And that's when you go back to those shorter chains of demand. I mean, the tax system in this country, the UK, has been widely abused by multinational companies and big corporations. And we think that it's better, we could set a lower rate of tax to attract companies, but we'll collect the tax. And we can also, I would like to see us moving to a tax system where we actually reward companies that invest in research and development. Whereas in this country, our universities invest in research and development, but compared to a country like Finland, our business investment in research and development to grow our businesses and create highly skilled jobs is very, very low, and that's what the industrial strategy would do. The other thing that we're proposing to do, the definitive thing we're proposing to do, is reduce air passenger duty by 50%. At the moment, we don't have enough connections with the rest of the world, and that's an emphasis on, you know, independence isn't about separation, it's about joining in. And by improving our connections with the rest of the world, we can improve business, we can improve our business connections, and we can make family holidays cheaper as well. But the more important thing is actually to get people to come here, to get tourists to come here, and to increase our business connections with the rest of the world. Lastly, we're going to support energy efficiency and roll out green technology from central government, and we're going to reduce energy bills by about 5% by taking the subsidy that is given in terms of green energy. The government will pay that instead of the consumer paying it, so the bills will be cut by 5%, and that's in contrast with the proposals by Ed Miliband just to freeze bills for a number of years down south. We're actually proposing a permanent cut of 5% in energy bills. So that's Scotland's future in a nutshell. There are answers to 650 questions on independence. And I would encourage you all to go to scotreferendum.com and download it because it's fully searchable. I just want to finish off by saying that that's our vision. I haven't seen a vision from the other side, and I don't think we're going to see a vision for the other side. So we can sit around and wait for things to improve, but given the record of the UK, as outlined by all our previous speakers, it doesn't look as if it's going to happen. So that's why I'm encouraging people to vote yes, and encouraging people to read this and take it out and campaign for a yes vote that could transform our country. Thank you very much.
Questions? You've had two already. I'll come back to you.
I'm ready.
Gordon?
Yes, thanks, Drew. I think tonight's important because you're hoping there's a lot of undecided people here, and you've got to convince them.
Mm-hmm.
And we've heard from most of the speakers how wonderful Scotland is and how great it could be if it's independent. So do you think it's a tactical mistake deciding to go for this currency union? Because the currency union is going to link us with the city and London, which you've all been slagging off.
Well,
Now, I'm not quite finished.
Right, okay.
And do you also think it's acceptable for Alex Salmond to say it's all a bluff? Because those folk down the city, those 85 trillionaires, I don't think they bluff about things like that. And should we not have had a better plan B to say, look, if you don't want us down, in this currency union, this is what we're going to do instead? Because I think I'd prefer the instead rather than linking with London and the city.
Well, as I said earlier, at the moment we control 7% of our taxes, and it's going to move to 15% when the Scotland Act comes into force in a couple of years. With independence, even in a currency union, we control all of our taxes. So we have that macroeconomic policy. So the idea that we're not an independent country, that we don't have that kind of freedom under a currency union is wrong. I mean, France and Germany are independent countries. The currency union was what we set up, Alex Salmond set up a fiscal commission. It was given a completely independent remit. It had two Nobel laureates on it, Joe Stiglitz and James Mirrlees, as well as people like Crawford Beveridge, who's run very large companies in America and used to run Scottish
Sorry
Enterprise.
to interrupt though, Joan. Lots of undecided people I speak to hear about these people, Nobel laureates and all the rest, but they're really concerned that this currency union that's going to be controlled by the city and London. And they would really like to hear what is the backup plan. What do the Nobel laureates think will be a good plan B?
The Nobel laureates looked at different options. They looked at an independent Scottish currency, they looked at a sterling zone that wasn't part of a formal currency union. And so they looked at the pros and cons of all these different options, and they decided that the currency union was the best option for Scotland and for the rest of the UK to allow free trade to continue without transaction costs. I mean, in terms of, there is a big lie being put out about this currency union, which is that George Osborne said we can't use the pound. That's rubbish. Any country can use the pound. The pound is a fully tradable international currency. We can use the pound. There is absolutely no doubt about that. What has been said is that what they can say, well, we're not sharing the Bank of England with you. We're not entering into a sharing of assets. But if you don't share assets, that means you don't share liabilities either. So it would mean Scotland wouldn't inherit the debt. The UK government's already acknowledged that the debt is theirs, and that because they want to be the continuing state. So if you didn't enter into a formal currency union, if you just adopted sterling, you would be doing so as a country that has no debt at all. And there's only one other country in the world that doesn't have debt.
Does this not suggest that there's a halfway house here, that the SNP can say quite legitimately and quite strongly and coercively with the backing of the fiscal committee that our preference is a currency union, but, and even the fiscal committee admit, there are at least two, and you've named them, other viable options.
Mm-hmm.
So let's the SNP promote their policy, and it stops Osborne and company from creating a hoo-ha about this, because it's coming over on the streets when you speak to people as if it's a currency union or nothing, the rest are all doomed to failure. It's not the case. I accept it's SNP's preferred option, but it's not the only viable option. Somehow or other, if we, in a broad-based campaign like this, if you can get that message over, is everybody not happy, apart from George Osborne?
I think that point has been made. I'm aware that the Dambusters strategy means that that perhaps that hasn't come across as clearly in the media as it could have. I mean, if you remember, when George Osborne made his speech, he didn't answer any questions afterwards, and they didn't put up.
For a moment, it's George Osborne.
No, I know that. I mean, but they didn't. They were not put on the spot by the media. You know, Scottish ministers came forward and explained their policies, and Alex Salmond, I think, did every political programme that was going. But the Chancellor didn't come back to defend his position. And certainly a number of people, I mean, today I was sitting on the Economy Committee of the Parliament, and Professor Muscatelli, the Chancellor of Glasgow University, who's also an economist, was arguing very strongly for the currency union. And he was saying that he believed it was political bluff on the part of not just George Osborne, but the other political leaders as well.
I think it is bluff, but it's been painted as a currency union, or we're all doomed.
My own view is, and I've said this in other debates, is that, you know, I think it's important that we emphasise the fact that we can continue to use the pound. If we wish to do that, they cannot stop us using the pound. And if we did do that without a formal currency union, we wouldn't inherit any of the debt, which I think is a pretty attractive option as well, in my personal view. So perhaps let's watch this space. You know, I think if there was a possibility of us saying, right, that's fine, you keep all the assets and you can keep the debt as well, because we don't have any legal obligation to the debt, and the UK government have already said that. And there's only one country in the world, as far as I know, that doesn't have any debt, and that's Norway. And last week, when we had a variety of economists, unionist economists actually, up in front of the Economy Committee of the Parliament, because we're doing our own investigation into independence at the moment. And quite a number of those unionist economists talked about the attractiveness of starting out with no debt. So I think that's probably the two choices that you're looking at.
Sorry, to continue that, should the SNP not be trying to stress the impact of us not being in a currency union on the rest of the UK? If we were to go into a sterling zone, the size of our economy compared to the size of what would then be under the Bank of England's control, what would be under Westminster's control, would be destabilising to the pound itself. The impact of all the debt losing our economic product to help service that debt means all of a sudden the sterling would take another hit. It doesn't suit. There are other options, but they don't suit anybody, because we'd end up tied to a currency that would be getting damaged because we are using it. So the SNP, should they not be trying to at least get that point across, that the alternatives, they're there, they'll work. In the short term, there's no way we're going to start up our own currency from day one, so we will be doing it, but it will have a very negative effect on sterling for the rest of the UK as well as for us.
In terms of, certainly the First Minister, when he's spoken about this, every interview he repeats the point that the transaction costs to business in the rest of the UK will be enormous. And Professor Muscatelli's paper to the Economy Committee that he submitted this week calculated it as being anything up to £500 billion of transaction costs to the rest of the UK business. So it's going to be quite a difficult thing for a UK Chancellor to explain to UK business why they have to put up with those transaction costs. And also in terms of the strength of the pound, when you take away both oil and whisky, because whisky is quite often overlooked, but whisky accounts for a quarter of the UK's food and drink exports. A quarter of the whole of the UK's food and drink exports is Scottish whisky. So that's making a huge difference to the UK's balance of payments. And so therefore, if you took Scotland out of the sterling zone, it would have a really negative effect on the pound. And we have made those points. But the Dambusters strategy continues. I can see, you've said that people have raised it on the doorsteps, and I take that on board, and I'm not surprised given the Dambusters strategy, but certainly this poll in the Daily Record tomorrow would seem to indicate that it's not having a great effect on voting intentions, and actually quite the opposite.
Thank you, Joan.
Okay.
You've had your two questions. Give you a chance to